The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and my mother's perfume, the kind she only wore when she wanted to impress someone. I stood in the doorway of my childhood home for the first time in 8 months, suitcase still in my hand, and watched my mother fuss over a centerpiece of white roses on the dining room table. She didn't look up when I walked in. "You can sleep in the craft room," she said. "The guest room is for Aunt Patricia." I set my suitcase down. "It's good to see you too, Mom." She finally looked at me then. That quick, scanning look she'd been giving me my whole life. The one that started at my shoes and ended somewhere around my collarbone, like she was doing inventory and finding things missing. "You look tired," she said. Then she went back to the roses. That was a Thursday. My brother's engagement party was Saturday. My brother, older by 4 years, golden in ways I never understood how to be, was marrying a woman named Claire. I'd met Claire exactly once, at Christmas 2 years ago, when she'd laughed at all my mother's jokes and complimented the dry pot roast twice. My mother had decided she was perfect before the appetizers were cleared. I want to be fair. My brother wasn't cruel. He was just absent. The way people are absent when they've never had to work very hard to be loved. He called on birthdays sometimes. He forwarded funny videos. He existed in my life the way a nice piece of furniture exists in a room you rarely use. Present. Inoffensive. Not quite yours. Growing up, he was the one with the trophies on the mantle. I was the one who set the table. He was the one whose college acceptance letter my parents framed. I was the one who paid for my own tuition and got a card in the mail that said, "So proud," in my mother's handwriting, ! Doing a lot of heavy lifting. I had told myself this trip was different. I was 31 now. I had a job I was good at, apartment in a city that felt like mine, a therapist who had helped me name things I used to just absorb in silence. I had driven 6 hours because my brother asked me to, because he said it would mean a lot, because somewhere in me there is still a person who wants to believe that families can surprise you. I should have known better by the second day. My mother had a binder. An actual 3-ring binder with plastic page protectors and color-coded tabs for the engagement party. My cousin Dana was in charge of flowers. Claire's sister was managing the guest welcome. My brother was handling the catering confirmation. I found out what I was doing when I heard my mother on the phone with Aunt Patricia. "Oh, we've got it all covered," she said, standing at the kitchen counter with her back to the hallway where I was standing. "Melissa's here, so she can help with setup. You know how she is? She's good at that kind of thing." I stood very still. She's good at that kind of thing. Not Melissa's here, and we're so glad. Not my daughter drove 6 hours to celebrate. Just, she's useful. She can move chairs. I went back to the craft room and sat on the edge of the pull-out sofa, the metal bar already pressing into my thigh through the thin mattress, and I thought about the drive home, measured it in hours. Decided I wasn't ready to leave yet, not because I thought things would get better, but because there was a part of me still that wanted to witness something. I didn't know what yet. The party was at a venue my mother had rented, a converted farmhouse about 20 minutes outside of town, with string lights in the rafters and round tables with ivory tablecloths. It was genuinely beautiful. I will give her that. She had worked hard on it. She knew how to make a room feel like love, even when the love itself was unevenly distributed. I arrived at 4 to help with setup. I carried folding chairs. I centered candles. I untangled a string of lights that had knotted themselves into something that took 40 minutes, and a level of patience I did not know I still had. My mother walked past me 3 times without saying anything. The 3rd time she stopped, looked at the light string in my hands, and said, "Make sure you hang it higher on the left side. It was drooping in the photos last time." "Sure," I said. She walked away. I hung it higher on the left side. Guests started arriving around 6. I had changed into the dress I'd brought. Dark green, simple, the kind of thing I feel like myself in. And I stood near the side of the room and watched people hug my brother and shake hands with Claire and tell my mother what a wonderful job she'd done with everything. My mother smiled and said, thank you, we're just so thrilled." No one mentioned the lights. I found my name card around 6:30 when the seating was announced. There were 4 large round tables in the center of the room under the main lights, draped in candlelit, where the family was seated. I could see my mother's card, my brother's card, Claire's family spread across 2 tables. My card was at a narrow rectangular table along the far wall, near the door to the kitchen, where the servers were coming in and out, where the air smelled like dish soap and warm plates. 2 of Claire's co-workers were also at that table. They were perfectly nice people. They were also not family. I stood there for a moment with my card in my hand. I want to describe what that moment felt like, but I'm not sure I have the right words for it. It wasn't shock, not exactly. It was more like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. The kind of clarity that arrives not with a bang, but with a quiet, definitive "oh." Like your body had known for years and was only now allowing your mind to catch up. I'd driven 6 hours. I carried chairs. I'd untangled lights for 40 minutes. I'd slept on a mattress with a metal bar in it without saying a word, and they had put me next to the kitchen door. I set the card back down on the table, very gently, the way you set something down when you've decided you're not picking it up again. I went and found my purse. My brother caught me near the entrance. He must have seen something in my face, or in the direction I was walking, because he stepped into my path with that easy smile of his. The one that had charmed teachers and coaches and every person in every room his whole life. "Hey," he said. "Where are you going? They're about to do the first toast." "I'm heading out," I said. His smile flickered. "What? Why? The party just started." I looked at him, really looked at him. The way you look at him, the way you look at someone when you're deciding how much truth to give them. He looked genuinely confused. And that, somehow, was the worst part. Not malice, just a complete and total absence of awareness. He had never had to notice these things. There had never been any reason for him to. "I'm not feeling well," I said. It was the kindest available option. He started to say something else, but I was already moving, already through the door, already in the parking lot where the early May air was cool and smelled like grass and distant rain. I sat in my car for a moment without starting it. Through the farmhouse windows, I could see the warm amber glow of the party, the shapes of people laughing, my mother gesturing gracefully at something, the chandelier she'd rented catching the light. I started the car. I was 40 minutes down the highway when my phone started ringing. My mother. I let it go to voicemail, then my brother, then my mother again. I turned on the radio, something low and steady, and I drove. I stopped at a diner outside of a town I didn't know and ordered coffee and eggs and sat in a corner booth and looked out at the dark parking lot. The waitress was maybe 60, with kind eyes and a silver braid, and she refilled my coffee without asking. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the chair I'd left at that table. I thought about the dress I was still wearing. I thought about what it means to keep showing up for people who arrange the furniture of their love in ways that make your absence easier than your presence. When I got back to the hotel I'd booked, I had stopped staying at my mother's house 2 years ago, though I kept pretending I hadn't. I had 11 missed calls and a voicemail from my mother that I saved without listening to, and a text from my brother that said, "We need to talk." Something happened. I showered and got into bed and stared at the ceiling and thought, yes, I imagined something did. What I didn't know yet was the thing that had been sitting in motion for 3 weeks, quietly, in the way that important things often move, without my knowledge or involvement. Let me back up. 6 months before the engagement party, I had lunch with an old friend, a woman named Sophie who'd grown up 2 streets over from me and who I'd stayed close with in the way you stay close with, people who knew you before you learned to perform yourself. Sophie worked in finance. Sophie was precise and observant and had no patience for what she called ambient dishonesty. Over lunch, Sophie had told me something she'd been sitting on for weeks. She'd seen Claire, my brother's fiancée, at a restaurant in the city, with a man, in a way that was not ambiguous. Sophie had taken a photo, not maliciously. She'd done it reflexively, the way you document something your brain hasn't processed yet, and then she'd sat on it because she didn't know what to do with it. She showed me over our lunch salads. I recognized Claire's profile. The man's face was visible. "I don't know if I'm reading it wrong," Sophie said. "I don't want to start something if I'm wrong." I looked at the photo for a long time. "You're not reading it wrong," I said. We talked about what to do. I thought about my brother. his easy smile, his handshakes, his complete and total absence of awareness. I thought about whether he deserved to know. I concluded, without much difficulty, that yes, he did. But I also knew that if I walked up to my brother and said, "I've something to tell you about Claire," the first question, spoken or not, would be, "Why would you say something like this?" Because I was the complicated one. The one who left family parties early. The one my mother described to Aunt Patricia as she's good at that kind of thing. Any accusation coming from me would arrive preloaded with motive. So I thought about it for 3 weeks. And then I called someone who had no complicated history with my family, someone whose word would land cleanly. I called my brother's best friend, a man named Derek, who had been his roommate in college and who I knew to be fundamentally honest. I told Derek what Sophie had seen. I sent him the photo. I said, "I think he needs to know, and I think it should come from you." Then I drove 6 hours to an engagement party and carried chairs and untangled lights and found my name card next to the kitchen door and left. What I found out later, from Sophie, who had stayed for the whole party and texted me a detailed account the next morning, was this: Derek had shown up to the party. He had pulled my brother aside sometime around 7:30, maybe 30 minutes after I'd left. They had talked in the coat room for 15 minutes. My brother had come out with a look that Sophie described as completely flattened, like the air had gone out of him. He had walked back into the party and gone directly to Claire. What happened next was not loud or dramatic, or the kind of scene that makes people's phones come out. It was quiet. That was what Sophie kept saying. It was so quiet. My brother spoke to Claire in a low voice near the bar. Claire's face changed. Her sister moved toward them. My mother materialized from across the room with the sixth sense she had always had for a situation going sideways. My brother left his own engagement party at 8 o'clock. Claire followed him into the parking lot. My mother stood in the doorway of the farmhouse for a moment, and Sophie said she had never in her life seen my mother look like that. Not angry, not sad exactly, just recalibrating, the way a person looks when the story they were telling themselves has to be revised in real time. The guests ate the food and drank the wine and left in small, murmuring clusters. Sophie sent me all of this at 7 the next morning with a string of texts that took 4 minutes to arrive. I read them in bed with my coffee, the hotel curtains letting in a pale line of light. My brother called me that afternoon. Not texted, called. He sat on the phone quietly for a moment after I picked up, and then he said, "Derek told me you're the one who found out." "Sophie found out," I said. "I just figured out who to tell." Another silence. Then, "Why didn't you tell me yourself?" I had thought about this. I had an answer ready, but I took a moment before I gave it to him because I wanted it to land correctly. "Because you wouldn't have believed me the same way," I said. "And you know that's true." He didn't say anything for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, lower, stripped of the easy warmth he usually moved through the world with. "You left the party," he said. "Yes, because of the seating." It wasn't a question. He'd figured it out, or someone had told him, or he'd looked at the table near the kitchen door and done the math. I didn't know which. "That was part of it," I said. "I didn't know about that," he said. "I didn't know about that," he said. "I want you to know that. I didn't organize the seating." "I know you didn't," I said. And I did know that. It made it neither better nor worse, exactly, but I knew it. We talked for a long time after that, longer than we had talked in years maybe. It was not a comfortable conversation. It had the specific discomfort of two people who have been circling something for a very long time and have finally run out of room to keep circling. He said things I hadn't expected him to say. I said things I had been carrying for longer than I realized. I'm not going to tell you that it fixed everything. I don't believe in those kinds of endings, the ones where one hard conversation repairs decades of accumulated distance. What I will tell you is that something shifted. Some plate beneath the surface moved, slow and tectonic, in a direction it hadn't moved before. My mother called me 2 days later. I was back in my apartment, back in the city that felt like mine, sitting on my balcony with a kind of tired that comes not from doing too much, but from finally putting something down. She did not apologize, exactly. My mother doesn't do apologies the way other people do. She does a kind of careful acknowledgement, a verbal rearranging that I have learned to accept as the closest available thing. She said she thought the party planning had gotten overwhelming. She said she should have been more thoughtful. She said the craft room mattress was going to be replaced before I came next time. I said I appreciated that. Then she said, quietly, in a voice I didn't hear from her often, "I heard you were the one who found out about Claire." "Sophie found out," I said again. "I just knew who to tell." A pause. "You were looking out for your brother." "Yes," I said. Even after she started again. "Even so, he's my brother," I said. "That doesn't change." She was quiet for a moment. I watched a bird land on the balcony railing and then leave. "You should have been at the family table," my mother said. It came out smaller than her usual voice, like something she'd been holding and had finally decided to set down. I didn't say yes. I should have. I didn't say I know. I didn't perform forgiveness or manufacture warmth I hadn't gotten to yet. I said, "I'll see you at Thanksgiving, Mom." And I meant it. Not because everything was resolved. Not because the hurt had been addressed in full or the patterns had been broken or the future was suddenly uncomplicated, but because I had driven home with my hands steady on the wheel and my name card on that table behind me, and I had made phone calls that came from love rather than anger, and I had left a party that had no seat for me without burning it down. There's a version of this story where I stood up in the middle of that farmhouse and said every true thing out loud, where I pointed at the table by the kitchen door and made everyone look at what they'd done. I used to think that was the version I wanted. I don't want it anymore. What I wanted was simpler and harder and mine, to know that I had acted like someone who valued herself, even in a room that didn't. I sat on my balcony until the sun went low and the city came alive with its evening sounds, traffic and voices and the distant rhythm of someone's music. And I thought about the drive back, the radio low, the dark highway, the diner with the woman with the silver braid who refilled my coffee without asking. I thought, that was enough. That was actually enough. My name is not a name on a seating chart. My worth is not a table near the door. I had spent a long time waiting for the people who made the guest list to revise their understanding of me. What I found, driving home in the dark, was something quieter and more permanent than their approval. I had revised my understanding of myself. And I didn't need a seat at that table to do it.